So, I know we're in a bit of a, I wouldn't know if I'd say a hectic time, but we're in a very interesting time period. And recently Trump's talked about, restarting our nuclear programs.
Nuclear testing program.
Nuclear testing programs, for clarification.
Yep.
And I know a lot of that was done here in Nevada at the test site. Now, Now, why is this a bad idea for Nevadans, or just a bad idea in general?
Well, the idea of restarting the nuclear testing, whether it's a bad idea or a good idea, that I can't speak to. The fact is that there is a nuclear test ban treaty that the United States has signed on to but never ratified. And that's an interesting point. Congress never ratified the treaty, but it was something that we signed on to in 1992, and that's when nuclear testing ended at the test site and ended anywhere in terms of the United States. We had done over 1,000 tests at the test site before that, between 1951 and 1992, if you count concurrent tests out there. But it's the idea of restarting them, that would be very difficult to do. Obviously, you can do anything if you throw enough money at it, but it wouldn't be an easy thing. You can't just turn it back on. The test site is currently an area that's being used for stockpile stewardship and subcritical tests, but doing actual nuclear tests, that would take a great deal of work to restart out there.
Okay. Now, let's say if they were to restart it, they get through all these, hurdles and, red tape to get past, and they restart it. How would that affect local Nevadans?
Oh, I think if you think about the idea of restarting nuclear tests there, one of the things about the test site is once protests started there, and the protests at the test site didn't start with the start of the test site. Protests didn't really start until the 1960s. The test site gets started in 1951 when part of the old bombing range, Las Vegas bombing range out there, gets set aside to become the test site. But it was a good 10 to 15 years before you start seeing real protests happening out there. But once the protests happened, those were an ongoing part of what was happening at the test site. And that would happen immediately if that actually started back up, because people are not going to want that to happen. The fact is, we don't see nuclear testing as a positive thing anymore, and for good reason. The problem with radiation, the problem with fallout issues like that, making sure that there isn't anything, and all of that is something that you have to be very, very cautious with. And so, this would be also part of any restart out there. So it would not be something that could be restarted very easily, and would have a lot of different layers to it. So it would not be an easy process to do.
Okay. I want to change this up. Change the shop a little bit. So, can you tell me a little bit if, are there any health risks associated with this?
Well, there's always health risks. There's, if you're dealing with any kind of bombs, but certainly with nuclear bombs, yes, and nuclear devices, as they're called, and that's obviously something. But there, you're dealing with an area that's not my area. I'm an historian. I look at things historically, and so you'd have to talk to somebody who's dealing with the nuclear radiation and all of that. And there are people that are experts in that area.
Right.
They can speak to that.
So, but historically speaking, there has been people, because of the test site, who have gotten sick in different ways?
There have been a lot of people that have blamed the test site for illness, and there was in the case of like the Banbury blast, where it was an underground blast and it vented, and they didn't expect that, and so there was a lot of radioactive material. When I say it vented, it was supposed to be put down a deep hole, basically. It was about 900 feet down, and it was supposed to be capped, and that cap didn't hold, so it blew out the top of it, and a lot of material went up into the atmosphere, and that went downwind, and that's not good. So you had a lot of radioactive material that went downwind and settled over people that wasn't supposed to do that to. And in that case, yeah, you had a real problem with that. So, yep, and there were problems with that. Not to mention what happened in the Pacific with some of the tests out there, where they had tests that were a lot larger than they knew that they were going to be. Some of the thermonuclear tests out there. But again, that's not my area. I'm not an expert in the physics of the tests. I'm an historian, and that's a whole different area.
Okay, so would you say, was there any benefit towards Southern Nevadans when they were doing?
Oh, there was a huge amount.
Hold on, give me a sec. Sorry, this might be a little bright, but I feel like it's getting a little cloudier. Sorry, continue.
Where were you on the night of the 15th? Benefits, yeah, there's a lot of benefits to the test site. It brought in jobs, it brought in money, it brought in expertise. It was a huge part of the economy here, and as a part of the economic underpinnings of Southern Nevada, it was a huge part of the community for that. It's like Nellis, like the Strip, like anything else. It was a huge part, and still is a huge part of the economy of Southern Nevada.
So, historically speaking, if it was to bring that back, would we end up seeing a boost of some sort, or would it still be around the same?
I don't know how much more it would add to the economy. It probably would add some, but I don't think it would be enough to offset the negatives of it. But the reality is, because the test site is not closed at this point, and it's not the test site anymore, it's the Nevada National Security Site now. It's got a new name, and its name was changed in 2015. But they do a lot of other subcritical testing and stockpile stewardship and a lot of training out there and all of this. The site is still in active use today. So it's doing a lot that is bringing in a lot of economic value and a lot of security value to the country at this point. So it's still a very important area. So it's not like it doesn't have a value to the community and to Southern Nevada, but I wouldn't see it as something where you're going to say, yes, we should start doing nuclear testing for the economic value of it. No, that's not a good reason to start putting big holes in the ground out there.
Okay. Now, I know you told me a little bit about it, but could you just give me like a bit of a history of, nuclear testing at the site?
Yeah, quickie history. The bombing range was set up out there, and the bombing range is a much larger area. It actually stretched from basically Tonopah down to Las Vegas, and that was set aside right before World War II. And that was because we needed an area that could be set aside where we could train pilots and bombers for the upcoming World War II. We knew that we were going to have to train pilots and bombardiers and get ready for this war that was coming up. So the land was set aside for that. Now, after the war, when there was a need to find some place to start dealing with the fact that we had this new weapon, the atomic bomb and then the nuclear bomb, we had to find some place where we could test these and figure out how they worked and what to do with them. And there were different places in the United States that were looked at as sites, but the site that ended up being chosen was a part of the bombing range that existed here in southern Nevada. And so about 650 square miles of the bombing range was chosen. It was eventually more land was added to it. It's about 1,000 square miles now, but that was the area that was chosen to be what was initially the test site, as it was called then. And that's when, starting in 1951, it was set aside as the area that we were going to test these nuclear devices. Initially, they tested them above ground, and in 1962 that changed because there was a treaty signed that we were not going to do any more testing above ground, no more testing in the water, no more testing in the atmosphere, and so all the tests went underground. So nothing went into the atmosphere. We'd only done about 100 tests above ground. After that point, all the tests were underground, and the next little over 900 tests were all underground after that. All of those kept going until 1992, when the Test Ban Treaty was signed, but never ratified by Congress. But we have gone along with the Test Ban Treaty. The Soviet Union went along with the Test Ban Treaty, and China has gone along with the Test Ban Treaty. Unfortunately, North Korea has not, but the other ones have, though. The Soviet Union is now testing some new missiles that can carry nuclear warheads, and but they haven't apparently set off any new ones yet. But we haven't, and that's the whole thing. We haven't set anything off since 1992, and that's what happened there. The largest test out there was in 1962. That was the Sedan test, and that was an above-ground test. You can still see the test out there if you take a tour of the site, and you can take tours of the test site, the NNSS, the Nevada Nuclear, the National Nevada Security Site. Got to get the name correct. I'm still used to the test site, but that's got to get used to the new name out there.
I got a friend who works on the test site, and they all still call it the test site.
I know. Everybody does. Yeah. I still call McCarran, and it's Reed International, but that's all right.
That was a hard one to
Oh yeah, I still all the time I was here and all the time around the museum there, I always call it McCarran, so it's still McCarran to me. But yeah, so anyways, that's a real quick history of it.
So can you tell me a little bit about the history of any ex-presidents wanting to reopen the test site since then? Because that's...
No, this is the first time that I know of a president saying let's reopen testing, because it's the first time that you've been seeing the saber rattling coming out of Russia, not necessarily with bombs, but with new missiles, that are nuclear capable, and we've been watching North Korea doing nuclear testing all the way along. That's a problem, whether that's actually going to happen or not, who knows? There's a lot of things can be said, and they don't actually happen. I'm not at all convinced that this is going to happen. I don't really think it is personally, but that's way above my pay grade.
Okay. Is there anything you feel like you want to run through real quick, or do you feel like we've got enough?
My guess is you've got enough, because like I say, in terms of whether they're actually going to restart a testing program, my guess is no. But like I say, it's way above my pay grade. I have no idea. They trust me. They don't call a retired museum director to check with him. That's not who they're talking to.
All right then. Feel like we got